Hey there! So I'm deciding to do a video for this week's synthesis assignment for the chapter week 2 readings. I'm pretty excited because I really enjoyed the readings for this week and I got to learn a lot of things that I didn't already know and then also build upon subjects that I had learned about in the past. So I'll try to keep it to 6 to 8 minutes, but I like to talk, so I'm excited. Okay, so I guess I'll start with kind of the roots in the history of social and personality psychology. Psychology having fundamental roots stemming back to the 4th century, which is forever ago, which is crazy, where philosophers such as Aristotle and Plato and Hippocrates shared their beliefs about humans and human behavior. So it was really interesting to see how, from all the way back then, where psychology kind of has gone and where it is now. So moving on to the history of personality psychology, the article, the reading on that. I didn't know much about personality psychology, so I was really interested to learn about it as a whole, the history of it. So I learned that personality psychology is a study of science which looks at the person as a whole, looking into human individuality. So though it's kind of hand in hand with social psychology, personality psychology puts more of an emphasis on behaviors of human nature relating to individual self, wants, desires, needs, motivation, etc. I also learned about kind of during World War I, where psychologists and researchers kind of started using personality assessments and intelligence testing to recruit soldiers and see if they were fit or unfit for joining the military, which is really interesting that that's kind of like where that like intelligence testing, personality assessment started, considering it's still used today and keeps evolving. So yeah, and then after World War I, I'm kind of using that as like the historical event. I think after the war is when psychology like really grew and psychologists kind of became more specialized into content areas such as counseling, IO psychology, and clinical psychology. So then moving on to the history of social psychology, this article, I did learn that social psychology is a lot newer than personality psychology, having only been around for like maybe 100 years, a little more than 100 years, and that there's actually a couple branches of social psychology. So psychological social psychology, which looks at individual behavior and social stimuli, and then sociological social psychology, which looks at more group norms, cultural norms, group behavior, and societal roles, which I've always been more interested in. I took an undergrad class in social psychology and I really, really loved it. And then I learned about a man named Wilhelm Wundt, who is, I think I said that right, noted to be of influence to the founding of social psychology, and that has a pretty great effect on the two branches of this social psychology. What I found most interesting about the history of social psychology, I cannot talk, is in the 1980s when more cross-cultural research was occurring and not just typical like weird population research. People began to realize that social behaviors might be different depending on people who are in different cultures, such as individualist cultures. There's obviously behavior that's based on cultural norms and human behavior that is universal, but I guess at this time I learned that they were really figuring out that different cultures exhibit different cultural norms and cultural behaviors. So I thought that was really interesting. So some of my questions for the first articles about the history of social and personality psychology would be, what particular areas of social and personality psychology are considered more controversial? And then what kind of topics are being studied by these psychologists today? So how can we apply social psychology and personality psychology to today's really prevalent issues such as racism, violence, and politics? Okay, and moving on to the next article, Back to the Future Mythologies that Capture Real People in the Real World. This article examined the 4 ways that researchers can better recruit participants when convenient sampling happens way too often in research, like looking at the bigger picture and examining real people and data. So the focus here is to create obviously more of a representative picture. So the methods explained in this article were field experiments, big data methods, archival data methods, and observation. And then I just thought that this research article really examined more ways that social and personality psychologists can obtain data, instead of kind of using the old methods that might not reach up across all of the populations or cultures, especially beyond, your typical college classroom setting is what I think they used in this article. So then my question for this article would be, what is the most preferred method of research among researchers in general? I know they all have their pros and cons. Okay, so the next article was The Personality Panorama by Boyd, Pasca, and Lanning. And this article examined methods of data measurement within the field of social and personality psychology. This article said that self-reporting is, the most used tool of assessment, but in today's age, the collection of behavioral data is far more accessible than it ever was because of technology and everything that we can find. Collecting this behavioral data helps better understand personality breakdowns. The article said, personality breaking down into minutes, hours, days, months, years, and beyond that. So it's pretty interesting as this continues to evolve. So my question for the Personality Panorama article is, what are some ways to move through this ethical dilemma of tapping into the big world? So the last reading, called What a Nerdy Debate About P-Values Shows About Science and How to Fix It, I thought was kind of funny and interesting. It's an article on statistical significance, examining the p-value test, and explaining that certain scientists want to change this value. So currently the p-value is p is less than 0.05, and some researchers and scientists want to change it to p is less than 0.005. So this article is explaining that if this change occurs, then it would improve the reproducibility of scientific research in many fields. So it would edit the literature to become less corrupt. And I've learned about p-values just from my undergrad experience in statistics, and the purpose of these p-values are to find the possibility of something, to interpret rare results. I thought this was an interesting article, just because stats is so common and important in psychology. So the researchers here are just pushing for stronger results to be claimed in order to stop false claims in statistical significance and in science. So my questions for the article on statistical significance is, what will this take to be changed? What will it take for the p-value and the number of statistical significance to be changed? Has there been work on changing this? And is this critical? Is this absolutely critical for research and science? Does it have to change? So the last bit of content for this week was the documentary, the Three Identical Strangers documentary, which I thought was amazing. I really enjoyed watching it. I had briefly heard of the story before watching this documentary, about the three brothers who were reunited. So it kind of starts out really exciting and happy and crazy that David, Eddie, and Bobby all found out they were brothers, separated at birth, But of course, it's really a dark story. So as the documentary goes along, they find out that Louise Wise, the adoption agency where they came from, was actually running a secret research study on the parenting environment that these children were placed in and how that would affect their development. And obviously, it's the big nature versus nurture debate. For me, the first thing I thought of is the ethics of this experiment, which were just so insanely wrong. And of course, psychology and research itself has come a long way. Nothing like this would ever be allowed to take place. In the past, even 10, 20 years, I would think, because of the guidelines of scientific research and the ethical guidelines that researchers have to follow today. Because, of course, we've learned, even with the Milgram experiments, that long-term problems that these studies, can inflict on their subjects. And it's really heartbreaking to learn at the end of this documentary about Eddie developing manic depression and then taking his own life, which is just so, so sad. And of course, you don't know if that's, why that happened to him, but you can only, assume that there were some things that happened in his life, and one of them being, his separation from his brothers and growing up in the home he grew up in, and it just all came to a head when they all came back together, and it seems like they were happy at first, but then ultimately it's a really, really twisted story, and it had me really emotional for sure. And to think about all the other twins and triplets potentially that were involved in this study that don't know that they were, is really heartbreaking. So I really enjoyed that documentary. So my final questions for this assignment on the documentary Three Identical Strangers are, how are Bobby and David doing now? I know that's probably just an easy Google search, but I really wonder how they are and their lives are going. I know they got some of the study back that wasn't ever published of them. And then I also am curious about legal proceedings. So did anyone at Louise Wise get sued? Anybody that was involved, were there any legal charges pressed out of this kind of investigation? And yeah, that is it. I'm sorry my video is so long, but there were a lot of readings and I had a lot to talk about. So thank you very much.